We'll be doing our presentation on the Denver Airport automated baggage system. The Denver Airport finished in 1995 following years of planning and delays brought upon by the automated baggage system that was supposed to give the airport an advantage over their competition. The concept behind the new baggage system was simple in design, but many hiccups occurred along the way that resulted in massive financial loss, delays, and giving up on part of the baggage system, skyrocketing monthly maintenance fees, and finally the airport giving up on the system altogether. The next sections will go into further detail on the key project management principles and how they tied into the Denver Automated Baggage Project.
Planning scope management involves determining how the project's scope and requirements will be managed. With regards to the DIA project, they underestimated the scope and needs of the project from the beginning. This led to problem after problem. Instead of determining the requirements from the get-go, they tacked on requirements as the project went on. This step is key in much of the error prevention. With accurate planning, the flip-flop of direction that occurred mid-project would not have been a factor. In planning scope management, the first step is planning how the scope will be managed throughout the life of the project. Two important outputs produced from planning scope management are the Scope Management Plan and the Requirements Management Plan. The Scope Management Plan is based on the needs of the project and can be broad or specific and detailed. In-depth projects benefit from detailed scope management plans. The DAA project was on such a large scale that the more detailed the scope management plan, the better to potentially limit errors on every project level. The Requirements Management Plan needs to describe what conditions or capabilities must be met by the project to satisfy the specifications. This includes needs as well as expectations of the customer, sponsors, or other stakeholders. This plan documents how project requirements will be analyzed, documented, and managed. The DIA project had clear expectations of what was needed and necessary. However, the underestimation of what it would take to make this project feasible and functional in a desired time frame is what contributed to the baggage claim being considered a project failure. Defining scope involves reviewing the scope management plan, project charter, requirements, documents, and organizational process assets to create a scope management statement, adding more information as requirements are developed and change requests are approved. The main outputs of scope definition are the project scope statement and updates to project documents. The scope statement includes at least a project scope description, product user acceptance criteria, and it must be detailed. Since most IT projects require detailed functional and design specifications, these should also be referenced. The scope statement is important for confirming a common understanding of project scope. The scope of a project can often change when the cost and time constraints cannot. The DAA project had excessive schedule pressure, and thus the scope changed too often throughout the course of the project. This led to those working on the project to not have sufficient time to develop an in-depth understanding. Proper planning with proper understanding of what the scope of the project was could have led to greatest success in the project. Instead, it lacked planning, poor design, and more importantly, the lack of effective decision-making.
Collecting requirements is the basis for a project that completely solves a problem. Each requirement is like a puzzle piece to the bigger picture. Had they done a better job collecting and analyzing project requirements, parts of the project's setbacks could have been avoided. One large requirement overlooked was that of centralized management. By not taking this requirement into consideration, they hampered any sort of growth in the future or limited their ability to include other airlines in this feature.
This is Martin Melia for IST 302. As we've already discussed, the project manager and stakeholders failed to recognize the complexity of the project as a whole. The first clue was the WBS structure was not compiled correctly. After reviewing areas where Denver Airport fell short, they should have done the following to be successful. Gathered plans for the airport's layout and baggage system prior to doing any contracts. Gathered requests for proposals before contracts, centralized their baggage system to be ran in the airport from day one, included stakeholders in all meetings and refused their change orders after the fact if it did not meet project requirements, testing, and power requirements should have been established in the planning process. Once these were all gathered and all milestones input to the WBS and Gantt charts with realistic timelines, then it would have been clear that the project would have not been able to be come in on time or budget. Although the WBS was not a root cause of the project failure, if it was done correctly and given enough weight, it may have sent up some smoke that problems were coming.
My name is Kyle Lessig, and I'll be talking about validating scope. Validating the scope of the Denver International Airport Baggage Handling System project was not a primary reason for the project's failure. Rather, the large initial scope size created the challenge and timeframe. Scope creep was present in the project, however. Scope creep is when a project's scope tends to get bigger and bigger as the project progresses. With the Denver Airport project, United Airlines requested to add automated handling of oversized baggage and ski equipment. This created an even bigger scope than when the project first started, creating an enormous challenge for the project team. United Airlines would later request other changes to the oversized baggage input area as well. All of these changes widened the project scope and made the project more difficult to complete in time. Ultimately, at the end of a project, the scope must be validated. Scope validation is the formal acceptance of the completed project deliverables. The Denver Airport Baggage Handling Project failed and never had its scope validated. Too many issues arose when testing the system, and the system never met the initial project requirements, let alone new requirements from scope creep. The Denver Airport Baggage Project is unfortunately a good example of how scope creep can be harmful to a project's chances of success.
The primary goal of controlling scope is to influence factors that cause scope to change and to ensure scope changes are processed through change controls. While controlling scope might have assisted the DIA project, critical failures during the collecting requirements, defining scope, and validating scope phases may have put the scope in an uncontrollable situation. One of the best practices in controlling scope is utilizing off-the-shelf solutions. Heading into the project, the manual tug trolley system was a well-established method of baggage handling. Instead of going with the tried-and-true method and weighing the risks and benefits of utilizing this off-the-shelf technology, the project management team decided to push for a new technology that had never been implemented before. This had a cascading detrimental effect on not only the implementation of the baggage handling system, but had repercussions for the overall Denver International Airport project as a whole. Another best practice that was not utilized was keeping the scope realistic. The fact that they were unable to get any of the 16 vendors they solicited for a bid to accept the timeline to implement the system should have been a huge red flag that the complexity of this project was too high to meet the time window. Failure to realize that the project team needed to take control of the integrated baggage handling system 2 years into the project was also a contributing factor to the complexity of this project. Instead of having a 4-year time window to design, test, and implement the system, they only had 2 years to figure it all out. While the DIA did involve users in the project scope management process, they largely ignored their concerns. Multiple managers expressed concern over the time window for implementing the system.
Keeping scope under control will directly affect future projects at Denver International Airport. While it may not ensure project success, managing scope will support a feasible, efficient, and cost-effective finished product. The combined efforts of all team members to create, control, define, and validate the project's scope, collect requirements, and define an efficient work breakdown schedule will support a solid technology-incorporated solution.